Good afternoon. My name is Campbell Mcreary. I'm a Vice President, Capital Markets at AMVEST Capital in New York. Welcome to the AMVEST Capital Inc. live webinar with ION Energy. ION will trade on the TSX Venture as ION. We hope you'll enjoy today's program. It will also be available in replay mode. Feel free to chat in your questions in the question pane of the GoToWebinar control panel, or simply email them in. We'll try and ask the questions in real time or get you the answers after the webinar. AMVEST Capital is a New York-based specialist investment management and corporate finance firm focused solely on the natural resources sector. The all-important disclaimer. This call is hosted and recorded by AMVEST Capital Inc. All opinions expressed do not reflect the opinions of AMVEST Capital Inc. or any of its affiliates. This call is for informational purposes only. It does not constitute an offer to sell or the solicitation of an offer to sell or buy any security. Should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. AMVEST Capital Inc., its affiliates and clients may maintain positions in the digital assets or securities discussed on this call. Before we hear from Ali Haji and ION Energy, we're going to play a really attractive and interesting video that was made by the government of Mongolia and talking about how much they're dedicated to the mining sector. So here we go.
Mongolia is one of the emerging players within the global mining industry, implementing sustainable growth into the country's long-term development policy and the ever-evolving mining industry. The foundations of continuous economic growth of the country have been driven predominantly by the mining sector, and the policymakers as well as the public are convinced that Mongolia's natural resource industry offers the prospect of long-term and sustainable economic development. Mongolian economic growth has been strong for consecutive years, remaining above 5% since 2017. In 2019, the GDP growth rate reached 5.1% with total value of $13.8 billion. The steady economic growth has been driven predominantly by the mining sector, which accounts for 24% of the total GDP. The expansion of coal exports have reached 36 million tons for the first time and exceeded the total sales revenue of $3 billion. The mining sector is dominated by main players such as Tallinn, a key coal producer of Mongolia, who majorly contributed to the Mongolian coal industry growth in 2019. The coal production volume of Tallinn has reached 16.1 million tons, making the Tallinn the first domestic mining company that exceeded total sales of $1 billion. It shows the potential of domestic mining companies. Tallinn is not the first mining project in Mongolia that's attracting the flow of foreign investors. Tallinn is Mongolia's largest copper and gold mining company, with a strategic partnership between the government of Mongolia, Canadian Turquoise Hill Resources, and the global mining player Rio Tinto. Rio Tinto, one of the key investors, which managed the Tallinn to be the world's most advanced projects. In 2019, Tallinn produced 146,300 tons of copper in concentrate and 241,800 ounces of gold in concentration. The underground project at Tallinn deposit is developing rapidly, with the latest advancements by 14,874 meters. Not only Mongolian state-owned companies, but also Mongolian private companies attract foreign direct investment. Altyn Sagang Avo Gold Mine by Step Gold Limited is the first and only mining project receiving direct investment from the Development Bank of Mongolia's subsidiary company DBM Asset Management. Previously, in 2018, the company did an IPO at the Toronto Stock Exchange, successfully raising $21 million. To date, the ATO project fully commissioned and permitted and plans to process 60,000 ounces of gold in 2020. Mongolia is encouraging investors around the world to cooperate and develop a long-lasting and mutually beneficial partnership to achieve a common goal of contributing to economic growth and create a sustainable mining sector.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Going to Ali, I'm going to have you share your screen and do unmute yourself. Ali Haji, CEO and Director of Ion Energy. Ali's extensive knowledge of the financial services sector after having spent over 11 years in the asset management industry at Invesco Limited, performing strategic and process improvement roles. Ali has been the CEO of Ion Energy for the last 3 years and has served as an advisor to ATMA Capital Markets and ATMA Corp Limited over the last 4 years, a merchant bank, providing advisory services to public companies such as Step Gold, in addition to multiple private companies in the mining space. Again, we look forward to any questions that you might send in, and we'll ask them, and we'll also have a nice Q&A round with myself and my colleagues here at AMVEST Capital. Thank you. Ali, do you share your screen, your video? There we go.
There we go. Thank you, Campbell. Yep. Thanks everybody that's taking the time out of their busy Thursday afternoon to join us. I assume you must have had plans to go to the pub or otherwise, but thankfully you're stuck here with me. So thank you and welcome. I'm going to be talking about Ion Energy and what our plans are in the immediate and longer term. We are an exploring company looking for Mongolian lithium in a salar capacity. So we are a brine explorer operating in the South Gobi region, and I'll talk to that in just a second here. So Ion Energy was granted a license last year in 2019, January 2019, 81,000 hectares, the largest land package ever to be given to a private company by the government of Mongolia. It is strategically located only 30 kilometers from the Chinese border. We have infrastructure not too far from our asset. But obviously the grades that we've seen at a very early stage show a promising brine aquifer beneath the surface. So our average grade that we've seen to date is about 426 ppm. Our max grade maxes out at about 811 ppm. It is a very early stage project in an endoheric basin with no outflow to external bodies of water. But I think ultimately, as we'll go through this presentation, you'll see why our location and our in-country experience makes Ion Energy a compelling investment decision. So we do have the strategic advantage of being operating in a low-cost environment. We are first movers for lithium. The government of Mongolia has been very supportive of what we're trying to do. If you've been out to Ulaanbaatar, and as you've seen in the video that we displayed earlier, the reliance on coal is significantly high in Mongolia. So the government of Mongolia sees lithium as a green metal that allows them to move away from traditional fossil fuels and towards renewable energy. The aquifers that we are exploring today show work that was done by the Russians in the 1950s, indicate that the aquifers are only about 20 meters below surface. The government of Mongolia and the Russian government did some joint exercises in the 90s that furthered that evidence that they are shallow aquifers. In the 2000s and 2010s, the government then sent a team down from the University of Science and Technology to further assess the viability of commercially accepted lithium in the region. The university was able to find the grades that we spoke about earlier and thus put the license up for tender. So it is in the Gobi Desert, which means it's a very arid location. The basin that we're talking about has existed since the Cretaceous period, so there has been a significant amount of precipitation in that region that is now ultimately making up these salars. One of the key advantages that we have relative to our peers in the lithium triangle, if you will, is the fact that we are operating on a terrain that's fairly easy to traverse, as you can see in the image in the presentation there. But in addition to that, we have 250 days of sunshine and very high winds. So again, a nod to the renewable energy factor when we are ready to put this thing into production. A key advantage that Ion Energy holds above many, if not all, our peers is our strategic location advantage. As I mentioned at the onset of this presentation, we are only 30 kilometers from the Chinese border, not too far from the railway being utilized by Oyu Tolgoi and everybody else in the region to move goods into China. China, as you know, buys or purchases 53% of the world's lithium. They then refine 59% of that lithium and produce 73% of the world's lithium-ion batteries. They are a major market, but then again, on your doorstep, you have Korea, you have Taiwan, and you have Japan, all major battery manufacturers. And lithium, unfortunately or fortunately, is here to stay as far as battery chemistry is involved. So we've had a significant experience in country as a management team. Our chairman, Matthew Wood, began a company called Hunu Coal in 2010. It was a 20 million IPO on the ASX. He then sold it to Banpu of Thailand for about $500 million 14 months later. And as you've seen in the video that we've just shown you, Step Gold is another company that Matthew Wood is the chairman of. Some of our directors are also members of Step Gold's management team. That was an IPO on the Canadian stock market that has, it's been shy of 2 years and they have commenced production. So just an indication as to what can be achieved in a country where we've had significant experience and a team that really knows how to get things done on the ground. You heard my introduction there, so I'm not going to speak too much more on that. I've introduced Mr. Wood, our chairman. Bata Tumarocher, our director, who is currently the CEO of Step Gold. A note of importance there is that he was appointed a special advisor to the Minister of Mines during the People's Party, which was about 4 years ago. He was reappointed to that role when the Democratic Party took power not so long ago. And I guess that really speaks to our agnosticism or being politically agnostic in country, irrespective of which party is in power, but we're still able to get things done. Anil Warich, also a director of Step Gold, as well as multiple other firms and a principal of Atma Corp. He's had extensive experience in investment banking, beginning his career at Dundee and having got his MBA from the Goodman Institute. Enki is our exploration director. He's had a vast amount of experience in country. It's almost an industry brand, if you will, across Mongolia and around the world as well. Peter Schlow is our interim CFO. He is a CFA, CPA, and CA. So we'll touch on the geology here that I mentioned earlier, and what's important to note is that it is an endorheic basin. So that essentially means that all precipitation that's fallen in this region since the Cretaceous period has never gone out to an external body of water. We found relatively high-grade lithium samples near surface, and as I mentioned earlier, the work that's been done by the Russians indicates that we have a sizable aquifer in this drainage basin that we plan to explore once we go public. Our results, as mentioned, indicated there on the screen, but I think what's important to note is the terrain. In much of the licenses that you find in Latin America, in the Lithium Triangle, the crystals on surface are extremely jagged and end up really tearing into the tires of any vehicle. And as a result, it ends up driving up your costs. What we've found is that it is an extremely easy terrain to traverse. We've gone so far as to see Priuses on the property, which just tells you how easy it is to move along. So we have a two-phase exploration program once we do go public. We will begin with 200-meter apart drill holes down to 20 meters, which is indicative of the work done by the Russians. Once we've completed that, then we'll use a combination of XRF guns on site, as well as a third-party independent lab in Ulaanbaatar to validate our results. We'll expand that following our geological work and our chem analysis to 400 meters, thereby really getting a sense of how big this aquifer is. Once that drilling program has been completed, we will be engaging with an internationally accredited mining engineering firm to complete their structural work. And that, in essence, will give us a true sense of what sort of aquifer we're looking at here. In August of 2019, the company acquired our own auger rig that'll allow us to hit the ground running as soon as we are listed. As you may or may not know, for those of you on the phone, the TSX, when you do get conditional approval prior to going public, you need to maintain your exploration program. So we will, as soon as we are public, begin drilling and executing on our exploration program. So what are our catalysts and our capital structure? I think we mentioned earlier that we do, or we are looking to raise between $1 and $3 million. The $3 million mark will allow us to be operational for at least 2 years, if not longer, if we are able to stretch our budgets. Most of the majority of that work, or majority of that money, will go back into the ground. Exploration and structural work by themselves will occupy about $1.5 million. And then you have your license acquisition costs. So what's important to note there is that we're acquiring additional licenses in that Indo-Arctic basin that I showed you earlier in order to get a larger footprint. 81,000 hectares is a sizable land package, irrespective of the mineral being mined. But we believe there is an opportunity to really expand our footprint in country and also in that Indo-Arctic basin. So we are completing an RTO with a TSX Venture listed shell, Spirit Banner Capital Corp, that was listed about 2 years ago, having raised $1.25 million. There's currently $1 million in the till in Spirit Banner Capital today. And the money that we raise will allow us, as I mentioned, to complete our exploration and do the additional license acquisition as we had discussed earlier. So we are priced at 30 cents a share or a unit with a warrant priced at 40 cents. That would be an accelerated convert at a 60-day VWAP of 20 cents. I'm sorry, a 20-day VWAP of 60 cents. So the additional details that you will see here, I think, will hopefully make up for the majority of the questions that are to come forth. But as you know, Mongolia has a massive component of its GDP dedicated by or contributed by mining. The EV sector in the region, China being the largest consumer of EVs today, it is hands down the largest EV market anywhere out there in the world. The 2 Chinese manufacturers produce more EVs than all the other EV manufacturers around the world. So it is a very strong market to operate in, especially with the proximity that we have relative to China. So with that, nice and brief, but I will pass it on for questions or comments, anything that you have over there, Campbell?
Sure. So lithium in Mongolia versus lithium, let's say in Argentina, from a cost of getting it to the behemoth of Chinese manufacturing base, how compelling is the cost savings training it over from Mongolia versus many ships and all that from South America?
We don't have a specific number, but I can tell you that it'll be a fraction of the cost given the proximity as well as the cost of labor in Mongolia. Yeah. The tax regime in Mongolia, they're extremely encouraging as far as investment from foreign companies and then exporting an end product. Obviously, the future would be better if we were able to manufacture batteries in Mongolia, but that's still some way out. I think the government's been extremely supportive, and as a result of our proximity and their support, we will be a fraction of the cost.
And then just for sort of current use of lithium, how much of the total cost of, let's say, the battery is from lithium? Is it a significant part of the current manufacturing line?
Yeah, no, fair question. Most lithium batteries, specifically the lithium ion battery, only contains about 4% of lithium, which is a very small amount, but it is a critical element in the functioning of a lithium battery. There are new technologies being worked on, yet lithium remains an element that is required. So the LFA battery, for instance, that Tesla is now working on in China for its Model 3 production is slightly different because it is a phosphorus and iron-based battery as opposed to lithium, manganese, and cobalt. But lithium is going to be a critical ingredient or a critical part of all batteries going forward. From a cost perspective, I'd have to get back to you on that, but I do know it is a critical element that cannot be forgone.
This just came in. I know this is early, but what is your strategy around offtake agreements and longer-term financing? So how are you going to approach those two critical?
Very valid question, and I think whoever's asking the question must be aware of the offtake agreements between, Japan and the multiple suppliers. So Mitsubishi have theirs, and that helps to dictate or at least have a major influence on the pricing of lithium carbonate equivalent around the world. But I think it is far too early stage for us to engage with a strategic. The intent is to determine what we have to get a fair valuation for ourselves and our shareholders. So at this point, it is a bit too early to really look at an offtake agreement.
Does China itself have a potential lithium source, or are they really having to look to Mongolia?
So China does have some lithium. If you look at the slide there on the screen, you see those turquoise sort of rhombuses or squares. Those are brine assets, but they are being used, or rather, the extraction technology and methodologies are not quite as sophisticated as you would find in Latin America or in the Lithium Triangle. And that is because they've operated with minimal expertise, but also the quality of the brines has been found to be subpar. So as a result of whatever is extracted there, it then ends up going to an additional processing facility where it is refined to battery grade and then used in the battery factories across China. So their grades are vastly different. If you look at the scale there, we are a significant distance away, but the lithium that we found on surface, as well as some of the drilling done by the Swiss and the Germans just west of our license, indicate relatively high grades with minimal impurities. So we are quite optimistic about the grade that we will find once we begin our exploration program.
And lithium is from Australia. Would that be a compelling shipping cost, or again, would that not be competitive?
So it's not so much a shipping cost as far as Australia is concerned, but I mean that would add to our overhead. But in Australia, it is primarily hard rock. Hard rock has a massive capex influx at your onset. You need a massive capex influx at your onset, which then obviously will dictate the price of your end product. So as far as brine is concerned, brine tends to be, generally speaking, a lot cheaper to produce LCE from than hard rock is.
Can you speak a little more to how the Mongolian government could help with non-dilutive funding?
Sure. I think, as we mentioned earlier, they are extremely supportive of this initiative because it is looked at as renewable, or a shift to renewable and green. Governments around the world today are being rallied to divert funds that have been allocated to the COVID crisis once we emerge from this, any excess that's left there, to be put towards green energy and renewables. So the UK, I know, for instance, they're being pressured to divert funds over to ensuring that we are not a coal-consuming, fossil fuel-consuming population on the planet following this. And I think the Mongolian government, along with governments in that region, will be following suit and proposing that EV and renewable resources will be sort of part and parcel of the future.
Again, feel free to send in your questions through the question pane of GoToWebinar here, or email them or shoot them through the chat function. I'm going to call on my colleague Stuart McLaver of AMVEST Capital. And Stu, you had some questions that you wanted to ask.
Yeah, thanks Campbell, and thanks Ali for the presentation. Yeah, I guess the lithium in Mongolia wasn't something we originally kind of had thought about. I know, you know, some Canadians and Aussies have been successful in Mongolia the last 10, 15 years. So yeah, and the analogy with, and then the links to China being so close makes it very, you know, much more appealing. Compared to other ones more distant around the world. What percentage, like, do you have any spodumene targets on your grounds, or is it completely brine?
It's completely brine. So there is a spodumene asset north of us, significantly north.
Yeah.
The grades are fantastic. So having seen lithium on surface in and around where our license is in the Gobi, as well as looking at the geology at a very early stage, tells us that there is a significant amount of brine beneath the surface where we are operating today.
Got it. And have you noticed any neighbors come in, or other companies looking for lithium licenses? I mean, coal is obviously very active there, and you know, Oguntobi as well with copper. But I know you guys have a long history as a group of people in Mongolia, but since your success in securing these licenses, have you seen more competition? And
yeah, there is definitely a lot more interest, I'd say, as far as lithium is concerned. There are additional licenses coming up for tender. One of the things that I mentioned at the onset of the presentation is that there was a Swiss group that drilled not too far from us. We do know and a major German auto manufacturer has actually traversed or actually been on our property, which is indicative of the shift that you see with BMW, Mercedes, and Audi, as well as Volkswagen, all having laid off a significant number of staff, having sort of a German individual scouting for lithium on our license is just that much more promising for us.
Yeah, fair enough. And the exploration work completed on the licenses to date, is that mainly just the geochemical sampling and the mapping, or what to what extent has some drilling been completed so far?
The drilling is extremely minimal at this point, so there's still a significant way to go as far as exploration is concerned. And once we do get that off the ground this summer, so we talked about the cap structure and our catalyst earlier, but I will say that we want to be trading and listed by July. So the exploration work that we will do following that listing process will be rather extensive. It will allow us to identify or rather expand on the 2 targets that we've had. 81,000 hectares is sizable, to say the least. So we're not going to be drilling all across the license. We will focus on our 2 targets that we obtained from our samples from the university.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks for that, and thanks. That's all the questions I have at my end, but thanks for your presentation.
Sure. Gabe, you're up.
Hi, there we go. Hey, thanks, Campbell. Thanks, Ali, for the presentation. Yeah. So can you maybe give me a little bit of history on this tenement itself, or this, where exactly you're looking to explore or do your first sort of development, brine development? Because it just seems like such an obvious place to develop lithium, right? I mean, given the proximity, the geographical proximity to the largest refiner, effectively.
Yeah, fair. No, that's a valid question. I think for the longest time, the Russians tend to do work and then sort of hide it, so they get what we would call a rofer. So the work that was done by the Russians being primarily active in the USSR, Mongolia being part of that, the work that they had done was indicative of lithium, but Mongolia was always looked at as a coal and potentially gold and copper place. So folks weren't too interested in lithium until about 3 years ago, when the retail market sort of got excited on the lithium space, and you had companies with massive valuations that weren't quite economically feasible or viable. The recent shift to the EV trend, China sort of maintaining their subsidies and everything else, ignited an interest in the region to look for lithium. And as a result, the government of Mongolia saw it as a strategic element that they had to secure, and that is why they sent the university down there in 2016 to really traverse the entire southern Gobi region. So if we're looking at this map here, they sort of began around there. I'm not sure if everybody can see my cursor, but they began around there and went all the way down to sort of this region here, which is the southern Gobi. And in that process, we're able to find hard rock assets and ultimately the brine asset that we have been able to secure now. So it is something that I think wasn't on the radar for a lot of that part of the world, having their dependence on cheap coal. Lithium wasn't something that was of interest, but in the last 5 or so years, given what we've seen in the equity markets for lithium stocks, it ended up being far more attractive investment for the government to look at.
Yeah, and I guess as a follow-up, has there been any lithium extracted or moved from Mongolia to China or elsewhere?
There has not. So nobody has produced lithium in Mongolia just yet. There are multiple, rather 2 exploration programs that we've just touched on. One of them is us. We are the first mover on brine. Nobody else has moved on brine. So it is very early stage. Once we do get the exploration program off the ground, understand the chemistry, we can then look at whether or not we're going to use evaporation ponds or direct extraction technology to get our end product out.
Yeah, and do you see this becoming or not really becoming, but do you see Chinese investment interest or into this particular company? What are your thoughts on that?
I think so, yes. China and Mongolia have an interesting relationship, to say the least. But obviously, where the Chinese look to obtain minerals and elements, they generally end up getting it. Now, you also have the Japanese, and the Japanese work very closely with the Mongolians, the Germans as well. So you would see Chinese investment. It is a potential, it's a possibility, but I think you have to leave the opportunity for the Japanese, the Koreans, and the Taiwanese, as well as the Germans to participate in this. Suffice it to say that there are a lot of international countries that operate in Mongolia today, and that list is forever growing. So it's hard to pinpoint whether or not it would be a Chinese investor in the lithium space or otherwise.
Okay. And I guess my final question is just if you can give us a bit of color around what we could expect from ION, assuming, it seems like right now you've got enough in the vehicle to execute on your initial exploration program. And assuming let's say worst case and let's say best case, right? So worst case you raise 0, best case you raise the full 3 you're looking for. What could we expect to see in terms of ION? When can someone buy a share on market, and what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So worst case is not 0, unfortunately. Worst case will be 1.3. That's our minimum requirement in order to be listed on the TSX. There is about $1 million, as I mentioned, in the CPC that we are RTOing, so that brings us to about $2.3 million. We would spend about $1.3 million in the ground this summer to obtain a true sense of what sort of asset we're looking at here. Our G&A and marketing will bring us to about, you're looking close to a year and a half with the minimum raise without the additional license acquisition. If we are to get our full 3 million plus the $1 million that's sitting in the CPC today, we can carry forward with our exploration program, truly get a sense of almost a PEA by this time next year, as well as acquire additional hectarage or land in the region to truly get about a 160 to 180,000 hectare license or footprint.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Great.
Have you noticed any more other countries, China will go in there and help? I know they've helped with the infrastructure in Mongolia, but to secure the end metals, have you seen more of a Chinese presence here, especially given in other areas that are lithium rich, there's been a lot of Chinese capital has flowed in to those areas?
The Chinese government has been building highways across Mongolia with their One Belt, One Road initiative. They are involved there. They, as far as we know, are investing in multiple mines there. I think the Tiankis and the Ganfengs are truly the optimal, if you will, offtake partner or strategic investment purely because of their proximity to Mongolia. So to answer that question in short, yes, absolutely. I think the Chinese will play a pivotal role in the Mongolian mining economy for years to come.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that.
Absolutely.
Excellent. I think it's we sort of met the top of our program, and a little advance on your impending RTO. So let's have some closing remarks, Ali, and just kind of when can we meet again? When do you think we'll be trading as ION?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you again for your time, everybody. I will say that we are extremely excited about this opportunity to take this company public and find an aquifer that is a world-class aquifer. Obviously, COVID-19 and everything that's happening around the world today has been unprecedented in many ways, and as a result of that, we've faced some setbacks. I think that around the world, irrespective of what industry you're in, but I think coming out of this with the push to be part of the EV and renewable chain, we will see great success in the short to near term. So once we are public, you would expect to hear from us, Campbell, in and around the July timeframe. And we look forward to providing an update then. For anybody that's listening, anybody that's watching the recording, should you require more information, the presentation will be distributed later, as well as this recording. And once again, we thank you for your time.
Thank you. Good day, everyone.
Thanks very much.